Hi, I'm Eric Ostro, host of Live at the Lortel. For season 4, we continue our focus on art and activism. Why do off-Broadway artists uplift certain causes, and how do those causes make them the artists they are today? And while we gather virtually, we'd like to recognize that we occupy land stolen from Indigenous people. Join us in acknowledging this history and consider our role in reconciliation, decolonization, and allyship. Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is Eric Ostro. Welcome to the premiere episode of season 4 of Live at the Lortel. I'm very excited for this evening. We have an incredible guest to start off our season 4. Just a couple of things. I am a light-skinned man with light-colored glasses. I am wearing a navy blue cap, and I kind of have a beard. And my pronouns are his and him. I would love to introduce my very, very dear friend and co-host for the evening, Mr. John Andrew Morrison. Johnny.
Well, hello there, Eric Ostro, wonderful, beautiful, handsome, light-skinned man. My name is John Andrew Morrison, he, him, his. I am a very handsome black man sitting on his couch. And I'm very excited about our guest tonight. Michael R. Jackson has been a friend for a long time, a collaborator. He's brilliant, he's introspective, he's smart, he's funny. Represented now on Broadway with his hit musical A Strange Loop, which won the Pulitzer Prize and the Tony Award, and for which he also won a Tony Award himself for Best Book of a Musical. So why don't we bring him in, because he's delightful and lovely, Michael R. Jackson.
Good evening, Michael.
Hello, Eric. Hello, John Andrew.
Hello, my friend. How are you today?
I'm doing well on this rainy, cold day that I hate.
I know you've been busy, and that's a wonderful blessing for having a hit show and all of these accolades and all of this good stuff that's happening in your life. So I kind of wanted to start off with a quick question, which is, you've won the Pulitzer Prize, the Tony Award, New York Drama Critics Circle, the Outer Circle Critics Circle Award, the Hull Warrener, the Obie, the Broadway Alliance, the Dramatist, the Lamba Literary, on and on and on and on and on. How do you hold all of those accolades? How do you how do you, as Michael R. Jackson, waking up every day go, I've won just about everything? How do you hold all of
that? I don't really, to be honest. Like I can't focus on that because none of those things will help me get through the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like literally, like some of them can't even be a doorstop, even if I want. So I have to just appreciate them in the moment, and then I have to move on.
So talking about the ones that are actually real, the people want to know, where is your Tony right now?
So my Tony right now is in a box on a table because I had it sent out to be engraved. Because when you get it, it's not engraved initially, and you have to send it to be engraved. And I just got it back because it took me a long time to send it out, and so it just got back, and so I haven't taken it out of the box yet.
Okay. But you have had time to flick it and watch
it? Oh, I literally have not taken it out of the box.
Oh, okay. But even before you sent it, I always wanted to.
I did that on 29th.
Okay.
Because Andrew Keenan Bolger made me do it as one of the first participants I had to do. But other than that, I had it, I carried it around with me everywhere during Tony night, which was such a chaotic evening. And then I brought it home because I was going on vacation right afterwards.
Right.
And then it was just in my office for a bit, and then I was like, oh no, I need to get this engraved. And so I sent it to be engraved, and then it just came back.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah,
because my dear friend, and I call my sister sometimes, was in the showdown at Playwrights, and I made sure I saw one of the final performances there. I just have a little story about it. Seeing that show at Playwrights, sitting next to, I think, probably a subscriber. I think it was a matinee day. And it was a woman, an elderly woman. And we two were the last people in the theater to leave. And had an incredible conversation about the show. And I think it was just the fact of seeing my dear friend on stage do this incredible performance and something I have never, ever seen on stage before in my life, something so extraordinary that I had to turn to my left or right to talk to someone. And to my surprise, this woman was also in tears. And so we had a great conversation about it. Big, and she kept hitting the religion part. And I want to talk a little bit about that with you, if that's okay. Big theme in the show is religion. Can you talk about your relationship with religion growing up and how that affected your writing of the show?
Yeah, so I grew up in a Baptist church from birth. Like I went to the same church until I was 18 years old, and it was a church that my family was very, very deeply rooted in and had been for decades. My father grew up in that church. When my mother married my father, she joined that church and became, she was a church secretary. My grandfather was the trustee. My great uncle was the deacon. My grandmother was like a sort of the mother of the church, and like she taught a lot of Sunday school classes and Bible classes. I played for two of the choirs when I was, in sort of a preteen and through my teenage years. I went to church sometimes several times a week, vacation Bible school. Church, it was a very big part of my life for a very long time. And on one level, I it was it was a part of my community. Like there's a lot of people who are still at that church who I've known since I was born. And so I carry those people with me. But there was another dimension to it that, was became a issue once I started to come out as gay. And um and there was and dealing with sort of like the messages that often would come from the pulpit about homosexuality and about sexuality in general. But also I began to question like the Bible in general. And so religion has always been something that I have struggled with on some level, though since I left Detroit and moved to New York, I'm not a regular, I don't go to church at all, and I don't have a relationship to religion at all, but it's definitely a part of me.
Yeah, I mean, it's that like what did they say? The hate the sin, not the sinner. That kind of or hate the sin, love the sinner kind of thing.
Something
That
like
duality of that and that confusing messaging of like these are people who love you, but also despise or hate something that is a part of you. Um, uh, Can you
Go ahead.
talk about your family coming to see the show off Broadway? Because I remember you were very nervous about it, but it ended up being probably one of the most wonderful evenings at the theater, and I'm so thrilled with how that relationship is kind of playing out now.
So my parents came and saw Strange Loop for the first time off Broadway at Playwrights Horizons, and I really wanted them to come, but I was also nervous about them coming, but not necessarily for the reasons that most people might think. There are characters in the musical who are parent characters who, some might say are loosely drawn from uh, my parents, but like the truth is, it's like it's very much a projection or like a a, a young person's sort of
Yeah.
funhouse mirror image of his parents. And I was nervous. Not, I mean, like I was nervous more about them seeing the show itself and as a kind of artistic expression, more so than like whether they would watch it and think anything about themselves or like what I was saying about them or make any of that sort of thing, because my parents are not regular theater goers, and to the extent that they do, like they would go to more like mainstream kind of things, and I'm
Right.
not a mainstream, you know, writer. And so I think I was worried that they just wouldn't like it or like wouldn't get it or just be like, what is
Yeah.
this? I don't get it. But what happened was is they came and they loved it. I don't know that they necessarily understood every aspect of it, but they were so impressed by the singing and the actors and like it being all Black actors um and by just the excellence of it. And after the show, they sort of were standing in the lobby, and this like really incredible thing happened, which was that like people sort of started to get word that they were there, and they just this like circle just sort of like formed around them.
Yeah.
And then they sort of like being very proud parents just started like sort
Yeah.
of talking about what I was like as a child and just saying like how proud they were. And then the cast came out and they were just very complimentary to the cast, and it just was like a really a beautiful moment for us because I had sort of been in the closet as an artist to them. Like I'd come out as gay like 20 years before, but I had not really ever shared any of my work with them. And so it was this beautiful moment of like sort of coming out as an artist and them really sort of, I think, seeing me fully for the first time in a way that I really needed and deeply appreciated, because, you know, I had spent so many years working on this piece and like not ever knowing who was going to see it, let alone my own parents. And not knowing what anybody would think, let alone my own parents. And so when they sort of gave me their seal of approval, that to me meant more than anything. Like I could have gotten a bad review in the Times.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have cared because
You wouldn't have cared.
my parents like they loved it, and that like meant more to me than anything.
And so do you? Sorry, you go, Eric.
No, honey, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask, like, to follow up. So, do you feel now this freedom that you can like express everything that you need to express as an artist? Like you said, like you come out to them now as an artist.
I do. I mean, but the truth is, like, again, like there's just a lot that they will not. They won't get it first pass, but they're very invested in whatever I do. Like, like they are like wildly obsessed with A Strange Loop and with any press I do. With any, like I just did a Jennifer Hudson show, and my mom is like, what was she like? Who was there? What did you do? What did she ask you? Like, my dad like saw a preview for the show. Like, it was in a car dealership and it was on the TV, and he was like, "That's my son."
Oh wow! Oh wow!
And they're very invested, and so I sort of like don't worry about what they'll think really, because they just are like in my corner in a way that nobody else.
Oh,
And
it's so beautiful.
but I do feel a freedom to like just sort of talk to them about it, you know, but I try to sometimes translate it in a way that I think that they'll understand, depending on what it is.
And was that, I mean, after the show, did you sit down with them? Did they have questions about
they had like little things that were about, they wanted to know, is that me? Is that not me? Like, is that, like, it wasn't like,
that was my next question. Yeah.
it was sort of more from like almost, like the way I could describe it to people is that it's almost like they saw a Sardi's caricature of themselves. And there's something about that that's kind of like a feather in your cap.
Of course.
I never thought about it that way. That's true. Like there's something kind of based on me that's on a Broadway stage, and it's on yeah. That's kind of great.
And I just think that they are just their primary feeling is pride.
Oh, so nice. As a gay man, what was that experience like? I mean, growing up, and how did that affect your experience working in the theater or working on theater projects and being a musician? I mean, I don't know when you came out, but
When I was 17.
okay. So how did that affect your experience in the theater? I mean, obviously you write what you know and what you feel, but I would love to know when you came out and, maybe what you were working on, etc.
Well, when I came out, I was writing primarily like poems and short stories, and I was still very much trying to find my own voice. And so a lot of the writing I was doing at that time was just imitations of other people. And in that period, like there's a song on the show called Inner White Girl. And when I was 17, I was very much imitating my inner white girls, which at the time was a singular, Tori Amos, who is an artist that I hold in the highest regard. And so a lot of my work,
Me
like
as well.
I
Yeah.
still have it, is I go back, like it's just me trying to like write about my own experience, but in her style.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I think that was like a necessary period for me to go through as I was like figuring out what mattered to me and like what kind of art I wanted to make, that imitation period. And I think like lots of artists go through that with the people who inspire them.
Sure.
Um,
And were you a prodigy as a young kid? I mean, could you sit down at the piano and kind of hear something and play it, or
I was definitely not a prodigy. I took piano lessons starting from 8 years old,
mhm.
and I sort of quickly learned that I had perfect pitch. So that was like one thing. So I would say that all that really meant is that like there was a musicality in me, but I wasn't like a a prodigy. Like I just had an affinity for music and
Understood.
I liked it. And I wanted to, and especially once I was in my sort of imitation phase, and also I was playing at church, which was a lot of improvisation. And so a lot of my compositional style comes from just sort of playing around. And
uh,
especially once I did start working on Strange Loop, many years later, most of the songs that came out of it came from me playing around. It wasn't like I had a plan. I truly didn't. I just was like, ooh, I like this, I like that, I like that change from this chord to that chord, and then how do the lyrics fit in with that, and so on and so forth.
and as someone who has worked on your stuff, I know the perfect pitch. Oi, he will catch a wrong note real fast and let you know you sang a wrong note. Um, um, Tell us about your love affair with classic soap operas.
Mm,
Why do they
Yeah.
mean so much to you? And what is it about a soap opera that just gets your heart going?
So I grew up on soap operas when I was a little kid. My mother used to drop me off at her aunt's house, my great aunt Ruth, before I was old enough to go to school, and I would just be at her house like all day while my mother and father were at work.
mhm,
And so my aunt Ruth like I remember the day. The day would be like I'd get there in the morning. I think I probably watched like cartoons in the morning, and then cartoons would be off, and then game shows would be on in like the
mhm,
late morning, and I remember we would watch Sale of the Century, and we
mhm,
would watch Classic Concentration, and
mhm,
then Young and the Restless came on at 12:30, and then Days of Our Lives came on at 1, Another World came on at 2, Santa Barbara came on at 3. And
mm.
so since I had nothing else to do, there were no other children around, I just watched whatever my great aunt Ruth was watching. And so I got into what we call the stories.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And I
stories.
watched my aunt Ruth watch her stories, and I watched stories with her. And they just grabbed me, like, because they just were every single day there was a story on, and I got into them, and I got like invested in my favorite characters. And then like once I started school, I could only watch the shows on like half days and then like during the summer. And I would like what would happen is, because also back in those days on the soaps, a lot of the way that the stories went, they were intergenerational. So there would be like a grandmother or a grandfather and a mother and a kid, and like, and so that was happening in the soap. And then I would call my great aunt up and I would say, hey, I had a half day today, or I'm home for the summer and I missed all these stories and I needed her to catch me up.
Catch you up. Yeah.
So we would talk about like what had happened and she would catch me up. And it was like this weird thing. I would do it all the time. And it like bonded me and my great aunt Ruth, who was like 50 years older than me.
Sure.
Or maybe even 60 years older than me. And so then as I got older, I kept watching it because weirdly it was something that was like a family thing on the soap, but also a family thing at home.
Yeah.
And I think that it sort of, there's something about mortality that's attached to it as well. And these are stories that don't end. I mean, until of course years later when it all got canceled. But like, and I just think that this idea of stories without end and characters that just keep going forever really like grabbed me as a kid and like sort of rewired my brain and made me excited about, you know, being a writer and telling those stories. Because also the other thing that, like, you know, a lot of people make fun of soap operas, but back in sort of the heyday of them, it was almost like you were watching like a one-act play every day.
Yeah.
But a lot of those actors, particularly in the New York soaps, were like theater trained actors who would come and tell these stories for 1 hour a day, every day for, you know, 52 weeks a year. And so you would get to see these kinds of performances that you used to see in like 1940s movies with like people like Betty Davis and Marlon Brando. Like you see what I'm saying? And so you got this really high, whatever you think of the writing itself, you got these like high quality performances that could just really draw you in with a character that you get to know and love and hate, and who changes and who dies and comes back or whatever every single day for years and years and years and years and years. And you can always come back to them.
Yeah.
And pick it up.
And pick it up. And I think that just, it got me at an early age and I just stayed with it for decades.
When did you realize that someone wrote them? And I know that when you kind of like came to the city, your intention was to be a soap opera writer.
Yeah, so I think I realized that people wrote them because I would see in the grocery store like Soap Opera Digest and Soap Opera Weekly, and I would buy them. And for a brief period, I had a subscription, and then I would read it from cover to cover because I wanted to know everything about everyone. I wanted to know about their real lives, and they would often like have interviews with the writers and the head writers and people talking about, you know, what upcoming stories were coming and this sort of thing. And that's when I sort of was like, oh, like there's writers for these soaps. And at the same time, a different kind of soap opera I was reading were comic books. And I also wanted, you know, to write for comics as well. So and I was also writing my own little stories because I was also reading, you know, Stephen King and Jackie Collins and all these things.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of crossover in like the soap opera format if you think about it in those writers. And so it got me at an early age and I really wanted to do it. And that's why when I came to New York originally, my plan was I was going to like come to New York, go to NYU dramatic writing program, and then I was going to intern at a soap and try to get a writing job there. That was what my plan was.
And you did get an internship, right? You did.
I got a bunch of internships.
Yeah.
Not in the writer's office. That might have changed things for me if I had. But I interned for all my children in the production office. And
doing what there? Just
that
like
was a lot of
production
assistant work, like production assistant stuff, like in the office for the studio. So like I had to do a lot of ferrying these big giant tapes back and forth to the network offices for them, and like these heavy bags of like VHS tapes, and and like I had to deliver script changes to the actors and put them in their mailboxes and do a lot of Xeroxing and that sort of thing, which I didn't mind it. I just liked being around the set and seeing how a soap opera was made. And then I interned for the network, specifically ABC Daytime, and that was a little bit more corporate and just kind of basic. And then I did a 12-week youth marketing consultant job in between college and grad school, where I was like in a room with all these girls from like Long Island and Staten Island, these like white girls from Long Island and Staten Island, and this one Asian girl named Pam. And we would have to watch the shows every day, the ABC shows, and we have to give our feedback. But the thing that I sort of learned after the fact is that the network was really just using us to try to enact their agenda on the writers and the producers. Because at that time, they were
so your feedback would go to
like,
them.
Yeah, and I feel like they would try to manipulate us to be like, we don't like this, so that they could use it as a way of like justifying firing someone or redoing somebody's hair and makeup or whatever it was,
or somebody going down in the elevator chute. Right.
Correct.
I understand.
So but I at that time I loved it because I literally got paid, I think at that time, which is more money I'd ever seen in my life, I got paid like $600 a week to just watch soap operas, and I just thought that was like the coolest thing ever.
So how did all of this with soap operas, and I get you about the soap opera thing. For me, it's during COVID, I was a General Hospital, fanatic. And for me, it's very comforting because I see the characters that I've known for 20, 25 years, and I can catch up in 5 episodes. I know what's going on.
Right.
But how, from there, did you start writing your own stuff, and most specifically, musicals?
So I, was in college at the dramatic writing program at NYU, and I was, I like taped like 3 to 4 soap operas every day that I would watch. But then I like had to go to like my playwriting classes and in my modern drama classes and classic drama and all my requirements. And they got us, as part of our tuition, they got us free tickets to see shows on Broadway and off Broadway and so forth. And so I got to see like a lot of shows, and the more I went and saw, the more I fell in love with theater. And also they had playwrights come in to talk to us in like my contemporary American playwrights class. And when that happened, like there was one playwright who came in named Craig Lucas, who his plays were so beautiful and dark and twisted, and I just had never seen or read anything like that. I didn't know that you could do the things that he was doing in a play. And it was like him and like John Patrick Shanley were like 2 writers who I encountered as a young playwright, who made me want to sort of take playwriting seriously. And also going to see the 2000 or 2001, or maybe 1999, the revival of Death of a Salesman with Brian Dennehy. I saw that when I was 19, and it just devastated me. I had never
incredible production, yeah.
And I just thought, and it just made me cry. And I just I want to make something that makes people feel like that. And so I just started to want to really try to take playwriting seriously, even though I still had it in my mind that I was going to write for soap operas. But I started doing it and like trying to do it and trying to get better and just going through many years. And then I loved musicals because I grew up as a kid doing musicals in children's theater and seeing them with my mother and watching them, on TV or on VHS. And so I loved musicals. And then I had a teacher who mentioned that there was an open house for the graduate musical theater writing program at NYU, and I just went on a lark. And I also had taken a class at that in the grad musical theater writing program on the history of musicals, and I just was I love musicals. And And so then when I graduated, I just felt like I needed some extra time. And so I just started applying for jobs and applying to grad schools. And I was like, whatever I get, whatever sticks, I'll do it. And it came down to I'd applied for a job at CBS Daytime to work for an executive. And I had applied to all these grad schools, including the Grad News Computer Writing program. And I got rejected from all of them except for NYU.
Huh.
And then I didn't get the job at CBS Daytime. And if I had gotten the job at CBS Daytime, I would not be writing musicals today.
Wow.
So the actual time, I mean, I remember years ago, I would be talking to John and he'd be like, I can't talk to you anymore. I'm going down to Joe's Pub, or I'm going to Michael's house to, you know, and I'd be like, Michael who? He's like, you know, Michael R. Jackson. He's a really phenomenal playwright and composer. And so what, from the first time that you had the idea of Strange Loop to when you opened at Playwrights, how many years did it take you, do you think, to write a Strange Loop?
Wait, from the beginning to Playwrights?
Yeah, I'd say from the beginning to like where you had your opening at Playwrights Horizons. Yeah.
It was 16 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a long. Go ahead, John. Sorry.
Well, because I want to ask a follow up to that. How did you keep going? Because what I do know is that during that time and maybe even before, there were horrible jobs and lean times and not happy times in terms of like work and all of that stuff. But somehow you are always like, all right, we're going to do this concert at this place, or we're gonna get together and do this reading in this studio, or this person is interested in doing it. So how did you keep the faith, or how did you just keep going? Because this show was in developmental hell for a long time. We were in development for a long time, and I can see how other people might get completely discouraged with that. 16 years is a long time. So how did you keep the faith, or how did you keep the stick-to-itiveness to keep going?
Well, I think the truth of the matter is that I didn't have a plan B. Like, I was working the horrible day jobs to support myself, and I didn't have any other thing that I was interested in.
Yeah.
So the writing was the thing that I turned to give me like comfort from having to sit in an office all day or usher or whatever it was that I was doing. So I stuck with it just because I didn't have anything else. I mean, the truth is I didn't have a man underneath me or over me. I didn't have children. It wasn't like I had anything else.
Yeah.
All I had was is my keyboard and my computer and my thoughts and my ideas.
Yeah.
And so I turned to that because that was my life raft. And if I didn't have that, then like life would not have been worth living for me, to be honest with you, because I didn't have something else.
So your artistry and craft obviously is something that brings you so much joy and lights up your heart. I mean, working as an usher during the day, and then what you looked forward to obviously was going home and writing and composing.
And so sometimes it was frustrating because I would have writer's block, or I thought what I was writing wasn't good or whatever, but like it was still like better that than to have nothing.
Yeah.
Makes perfect sense. You know, it's interesting with the Strange Loop. I want to talk about the relationship with your mom. I know, I did a lot of research on you, and I found out that your mom had gotten sick a few years ago. And how did that impact your relationship, and does it have anything to do with the show? And I'm not asking, is this person, but I know from your mom being sick that you created a relationship, that something maybe that you never had before.
Yeah, so I love my mother. I've always loved my mother. My mother is like the greatest lady that ever did it, like full stop. But when I was coming out, it was not easy. with her. And also, like, we both, I think at that point were in a place where we did not know how to take care of each other. And we also I don't think I didn't realize that everything was coming from a place of love, even if the love was very messed, or not messed up, but like was very complicated. And so it took me like many years to even realize that. And then when she, had like some major life health events happen to her, I suddenly had never imagined what it would be like to not have her in my life. And it was like very scary, and it just created a shift in me almost instantly.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to sort of really let go of any sort of resentments I might have been having before that, and just sort of see her as a human on the earth, and someone who needed care, and needed, and was who she was, and like who she was someone who loves her children,
Mm-hmm.
even if she sometimes, has a spicy way of delivering it.
I love the word spicy. Yeah, that's a nice way.
uh, but I also admire that about her. Like, I get a lot of my sort of gift for gab, if you want to call it that, from her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
My mother is a Southern lady. She tells stories in this like crazy circular like way where you like, where are you going? But she always comes back to like her theme, and it's such a pleasure to listen to her talk and to express things in the way that only she can express it.
Oh,
And so I just treasure her, and I, love her like so deeply.
one
Of
of
course.
the greatest honors and pleasures is when you've shared like some of the voicemails of
Yeah,
your
yeah.
mom. And the
Mm-hmm.
thing that really is, it's so true. There's such a deep love in just like listening to her talk about her kid and like trying to connect. And I love that you um, imbued the mother character, even though she's challenging in the show, with so much love. I mean, you could have written something more one sided, and there's such a
Yeah.
nuance and a wonderful loving duality in the mothers that you've created in the show that I appreciate, and as an actor is such a
And you get to
joy.
play it. I mean, there's so much dimension in there. And I want to ask this one more question, and then I'll stop hogging this podcast. In the show, Usher clearly loves his family, and they love him. Um, there was so much that I wanted to like, look at the parents as like a scapegoat, but the way you wrote it, I uh, you made that impossible for us to use them as a scapegoat. And I found that point of view and that writing. I feel like that's a reason why the show works so freaking beautifully because of that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
It
Yeah, I
really,
definitely,
yeah. Go ahead,
yeah,
please.
I definitely, it was important to me that there be nuance in the
Yeah.
show, and that in all the portrayals, and in trying to, I didn't want it to be a one-sided affair. Like, I needed for it to not be because it's so easy for people are always trying to stereotype, black moms as homophobic and all this stuff anyway. And it's so even like in a lot of interviews that I've done, there was one in particular where this one interviewer just like kept trying to like be like, but your mom's homophobic, and like kept trying to make it just be that. And I was just like, no, I'm not. I totally categorically reject the one dimensionality of that.
Yeah.
And so it was important because it's important to me in the show to see that love can be more than one thing, and I don't accept sort of like a racist trope about a black mom. Like, it just doesn't doesn't track. It's not true.
I mean,
Mom's in her own loop.
Mhm.
That's right.
She's in her own
Everybody's in
loop.
their own loop.
Yeah, correct. That's what I was
Yeah.
going to say. But it's clear that both their prejudice and their love emerge, from their faith. But we
But the
know
love
that
is true.
prejudice comes from fear. And
Right. It's not like she's saying, like, because growing up, for example, I had a relative who came out, and her mother responded to that by throwing her out of the house. My parents were never that would never have happened. Like inconceivable. So do you see what I'm saying? Like it's complicated.
Yeah. Oof. I wanna go back to growing up in the church and the messaging. A friend of yours, one thing that people don't know was that when we were about to open at Playwrights, you were in a state of mourning for a friend, and that was one of the who and some of that ended up in the play as a part of the gospel play sequence that happens, and I just remember how sad it was to see you be so deeply in grief about your friend, and I wonder if you can talk to how that affected the writing of that particular sequence, and why it was important for you to lay it out there in such a devastating way.
So the story of that is a strange loop in and unto itself, because the first song that I wrote that would end up in the show is the penultimate number, Memory Song. Memory Song was a song that I wrote while I was in grad school in 2004. And I had gone into the NYU program as a book writer, lyricist only. I was not writing music at that time, but by the end of the first year, I had gotten sort of a handle on lyric writing. And a teacher for one of our classes, as sort of a free assignment, said, if you're a lyricist who's never written music, or a composer who's never written lyrics, you want to try it, go for it. And so I had some musical ability because as I mentioned earlier, I grew up playing piano in church and so on and so forth. And also kind of trying to make up little tunes on piano, but I didn't know how to write lyrics. So then once I learned how to write lyrics, the music had somewhere to go. Now, earlier that year in class, there was a friend, a classmate of mine, who, for one of our assignments, we were told to write from ourselves. And he, with a collaborator who is the composer, wrote a song about a young Black gay man sort of waking up after a drug-induced hookup or something, and feeling a lot of gay shame about having had sex with a man. And he performed the song in class in front of us. And at that time, I reached down into my bag and I pulled out my notebook and I wrote down the phrase that came up for me listening to him perform the song. I wrote, all those Black gay boys I knew who chose to go on back to the Lord. It was just a phrase, like I thought I could use it for something maybe later, didn't know what, put it away. Because watching him sing that song reminded me of a lot of Black gay boys that I knew growing up, when I was in high school at least, who seemed to have this like shame cycle that they would go through in terms of their sexuality and religion and everything. And so then cut to that assignment where the teacher says, if you have written a song, or if you want to write a song with your lyrics or whatever. So I went away, opened up my little notebook that had all these ideas in them, and I opened a book and it fell on to all those Black gay boys I knew who chose to go on back to the Lord. I was like, okay, that's cool. So then I sat down at the piano and started messing around, and I came up with a little tune, and the song had its first sort of draft that came out of that. And then I played it in class, and it went over really well. And I was encouraged to continue writing my own music, even though for my second year I was going to be paired with a composer. And so I just kept writing songs, whatever. So fast forward to right before we are about to open, that friend was originally slated to do the orchestrations for A Strange Loop. And I had noticed that we were always supposed to be talking about it, and he would like disappear and he wouldn't respond to emails and texts. It was like very weird, and I just was trying to figure out like what is going on, like what I couldn't figure it out. I thought like, and I started to think, oh, maybe he has like, maybe he's like has like schizophrenia or something, or like because he just truly just like would vanish even though we would have plans. And then what happened was I get a text from him one day, and during this text exchange, we're just talking, shooting the shit about, I had posted something on Facebook and he was like arguing with me about it on text. And then he sort of casually mentions in the text message thread that he was in the hospital. And I was like, oh, why are you in the hospital? And then he was like, oh, it has to do with my heart. And I was like, oh, what's wrong with your heart? And he was like, oh, it's connected to my HIV status. And I was like, oh my God. And he said, and because I've not, really been taking good care of myself, it's progressed to AIDS. And it was like the most devastating, like just I couldn't believe what was happening. And then he sort of like slowly sort of turned around and was like, can you come visit me in the hospital? Because I'm lonely. And like, and what I realized is that he had been reaching out to me, sort of trying to tell me what was going on with him. And so I went to the hospital, and he like asked me to like bring him some Popeyes fried chicken because the food was terrible in the hospital. And so I brought it to him, and and we sat and we talked, and he just sort of finally told me sort of the truth of what had been going on with him. And suddenly it dawned on me like why I was like, there was all these weird disconnects over the last like year. And it was because he was having these like health events that because he had not been seeking any treatment. He had been positive for like 10 years and had not been seeking any treatment during that time. And he also referenced, because he had read the script, he had referenced as a joke, AIDS is God's punishment, as part of his thinking. And I just, so many pieces just start to fall into place. And so I immediately sort of jumped into like triage mode of like, we're going to get you well. Now you're in the hospital. We're going to do like all this stuff. There've been insurance issues, like all this stuff. And then like because he also lived near me. And so I would go to visit him and sit in his apartment with him and so on and so forth. And he would not tell his mother. So they knew he was sick, but he would make it seem like it was something else. And so then he died a month later.
I'm sorry.
And I flew to North Carolina to go to his funeral. And while I was at the church where the funeral was, the pastor got up to sort of say some words. And he made a comment that was very alarming to me. That sort of indicated that there was some really hateful ideology in this church. And I realized in that moment that he had been on some level raised with a lot of this negative ideology. And so then long story short, once I started researching the pastor, the church, thinking about his mother, who also sort of had some negative views, and just started thinking about the way that our lives were very similar in a lot of ways, and yet had these two different outcomes. And I thought about this statistic that was from 2017 that said that 1 in 2 Black gay men will become HIV positive in their lifetimes. And I start to think about, if that's true, that he was 1 and I was 2.
Mhm.
And that there was this
Wow.
strange sort of like connection between us and of HIV negative and HIV positive, and also I was writing the show that was
Mhm.
already sort of like getting at some of this stuff in a kind of general way. And when he passed away, it just was so obvious to me that I had to address it.
Mm.
And so I can't remember, John Andrew, whether the character of Darnell existed prior to that or not. I feel like he might have been mentioned
Mhm.
because because for a long time that song was really just about kind of a dark satire. You know what I
Right.
mean? It didn't
And
have
then
this a
it got
personal,
its teeth.
yeah, and then it got like
The
a personal. There was like I added like a personal element to it because that
Yeah.
song existed prior to him dying.
Yeah, it did.
But it didn't have the personal thing, and I just couldn't not
Yeah.
address the personal aspect
Mhm.
of it because that song was the cost
Right.
of my friend losing his life,
Right.
and it just was I could not address it.
And speaking of which, I know you're very involved with Broadway Cares, Equity Fights AIDS, and you get behind that organization. Can you talk a little bit about that organization and how people can donate or how people can help? I know you put a lot of time into advocacy, and
Well,
that's kind of where your activism meets
not
your.
really.
Okay.
No, I wouldn't say that. Would not be accurate. I have become involved with them very recently.
Okay.
I participated in Broadway Bears this
Hmm.
year, which is the first time I ever had seen it. And I do support them very much, like especially because they help so many people
You
living with
sure
HIV,
do.
AIDS,
Yeah.
and other illnesses. Deal with like financial issues and getting them connected to like healthcare. And so for me, it's really that simple. Um, that if you can just get money into people's pockets, get people connected to those who can help them with their health issues and
And the
all that
healthcare is so
healthcare, like
important.
it's so
Yeah.
important, especially like in the arts where like
Mhm.
one day you have insurance,
Yeah.
this week you
And
miss
next
your
day you
week, you
don't.
miss
Right.
your weeks by 1 week, and so you don't have health insurance and all
Yeah.
this stuff. So, and then I know also with COVID, I think that they also have helped there as well. So
Yeah.
I think that if you just go to BroadwayCares.org,
Hmm.
you can find all kinds of ways to participate and to support.
Yeah.
Well,
And
I will.
there's other ways besides just donating money. I mean, people can donate time, and
That's right.
there's a lot of ways to participate in many organizations, especially this one, besides just giving money.
I know we're coming to the end, but I want to say
Mhm.
that one way that you have saved people is by writing something so honest. And I always remember when we were doing the cast album, I was like, some gay boy is going to hear this and know that they're not alone, and know that there is another possibility. I think very deeply, and I really do believe this, that your show has saved somebody's life, just made them feel less lonely in the world, and for that I am so extremely proud to speak your words and sing your songs every day. And on a personal level, I also just have to say thank you for inviting me back to the party over and over again. You've changed my life. You've changed my career. And you didn't have to invite me back, and you generously did. And one of the things that for artists, you're that collaborator who is very loyal and generous, and for the artists who get to come and play with you, that is the thing that we adore and love about you, and I'm very, very, very grateful for that.
And John, you are. Go ahead.
I'm grateful for you, and you're my OG. John Andrew was
Mhm.
my first thought in the loop, and he's the oldest. He's the elder thought.
And John, you're unbelievable on this show.
And so much of what A Strange Loop is comes from the early experiments that we did back in 2008 with the character of the mother. And without that, there would be no peace. And so I owe so much to John Andrew for his generosity and his talent and his heart and his spirit. And his loopy dupes.
Man, he's good, and he's so freaking good in the show.
So good, you know.
And we're running out of time, but I want to hear about your latest project.
Yes. You
talk a little bit about it. I can't wait to hear it. And I can't wait to see it.
We alluded a little bit to it earlier with the soap opera talk.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, I grew up on soaps. I loved them. And I came up with this weird idea many years ago to do a sort of Lifetime movie sort of spoof called White Girl in Danger, because I used to love those Lifetime movies. They had titles
Me too.
Who Cried Too, He Fought Alone,
or Mother May I Sleep with Danger.
Mother May I Sleep with Danger with Tori Spelling. And
good one.
And they all had one thing in common. They had a white girl or woman in some sort of peril. Sometimes self-created, sometimes it was visited upon her. And I had this funny little idea for a song where I would go, white girl in danger, she's doing drugs, but she won't do her homework. Questions, oh Lord, you know. And so that it was just going to be like that sort of parody. And then these conversations about representation, equity, diversity, inclusion, and so on and so forth began to happen. And I started to think about what I thought of those topics as a Black theater writer specifically. And suddenly these two little molecules sort of floated together to form this idea of White Girl in Danger, which is set in a soap opera town called All White. And in All White, there are two races and classes of people. There are the All Whites, who have, all these glorious, crazy stories, adventure and romance and everything. And then you have the Black round, who have slavery and police violence. And they just cycle back and forth between those two over and over again. Until one of the Black round gets tired of it and she says she wants to be part of that world in All White. And then the writer lets her become a best friend to Megan, and Megan. Both all white girl problems.
Megan, Megan.
Boyfriend. One's got an eating disorder, and the other one's got a globe-trotting mother who ignores her. And so she starts to steal their little storylines away from them. And then that's when the writer sends the all-white killer after her, picking off the girls with the juiciest stories. And then the all-white killer's identity is revealed, and it's a big shocker. And therein lies the tale of White Girl in Danger.
So that's at Second Stage.
Yeah, in co-production with The Vineyard, who I've done a lot of development of the piece with them over the last 5 years.
It's hysterical.
And Second Stage, yes, it's a wild ride. It's a roller coaster. It's you never know what's going to happen next. Anything that can happen probably will. There's a lot of naughtiness in it. And
even
though it's called White Girl in Danger,
White Girl Danger.
That's not who it's about.
We're very excited about it. One last question, Michael. Where do you think the American theater is right now? I mean, we've had so much happen in the past 3.5 years between COVID and George Floyd and the riot on the Capitol and, tearing down of the theater we know and knew and sort of building something new. Where do you stand? Where's your point of view about theater right now?
I stand to the side. I'm just sitting here looking. I stand very critically. I stand with a critical gaze.
Okay. That's good enough for me.
Yeah. I don't fully I'm not fully on board with everything that everybody is saying. in doing. I have my
And you
own,
don't have to be.
I have my own
Absolutely not.
views, and I'm an artist, and sort of I put my questions in what I'm writing. So stay tuned for scenes from the next White Girl in Danger.
And that is an amazing,
If you'd like to know what
way to
if you'd like to know what some of my views are, or
go
some of
see
my,
your
if you'd like to know what some of
shows.
my questions are, if you want to know what some of my questions and feelings are, stay tuned for scenes from the next White Girl in Danger.
Well, I can't wait to see it, and I can't wait to hear what those questions are. Ladies and gentlemen, that is our show.
Bring your tomatoes. Bring your rock. I'm ready for it. I'm ready for all the tomatoes and the rock.
That is our show. Our next show will be recorded on Monday, October 24th. My dear friend and co-host Joy D. Michelle will be joining me to interview three-time Tony-nominated actor Robin DeJesus. Robin recently joined the cast of Hulu's Welcome to the Chippendales, wow, as Ray Colon. He can also be seen in the Netflix adaptation of Tick, Tick, Boom. We will talk with him about his amazing career as well as his involvement with the Cody Renard Richard Scholarship. Then on November 14th, Joy and I will interview award-winning writer Larissa Fasthorse. Larissa is a MacArthur Fellow and author of the hit comedy The Thanksgiving Play, which is one of the top 10 most produced plays in America. She is the first Native American playwright in history on that list. We will talk about that show scheduled to open on Broadway in the spring of 2023 and her other works. More information about these and future guests and how to attend one of our recordings online can be found on our website, liveathelortel.com. We are also looking forward to getting back to in-person at some point this season. Very exciting. And we'll share more information about that as it becomes available. Thank you for joining us tonight as we launch season 4. I cannot think of a better, more talented artist than Michael to start us off. Please stay healthy and go see A Strange Loop.
Woohoo!
Have a great evening, everybody.
Love
Good
you,
night.
Michael. Love you, Eric.
Thank you. Thank you again. Good night.
Bye.